I hope it doesn't sound arrogant when I say that I am the greatest man in the world.
It's Amazon's The Rings of Power time again, episode 7. We start with what was on previously, and they show footage of the Harfoots, the Southlands, and Khazad-dûm. So we're already off to a bad start, because at some point we know we're going to be back with the Harfoots. While researching videos, I came across an interesting quote from Tolkien. It went, "I cordially dislike allegory in all its manifestations, and always have done so since I grew old and wary enough to detect its presence." What struck me about this quote was that Amazon have taken Tolkien's work and filled it to the brim with allegory. I grow increasingly convinced that he would have hated this show with a burning passion. I've been trying some things out to try and get some better sound quality, so hopefully now it sounds less like I'm talking into a can, so please let me know if that worked and if it's an improvement. So what were the good and bad points? The highlight was the section with the dwarves. There was actually some quite good stuff in there. Sadly, the low points were almost everything else. We open up and Galadriel is covered in ash from the volcanic explosion, and how she's alive is anyone's guess. At Pompeii, the residents were 6 miles away from the volcano, and the cause of death seems to be somewhat undecided. 2 of the leading theories seem to be toxic gas from the volcano or being cooked to death by the heat, so in reality they should probably all be dead. Something about this opening immediately stuck in my craw. Galadriel gets up from the ruins covered in ash and has to swerve to avoid a horse that's on fire, and all this immediately rang a bell. So first up we have this scene from Game of Thrones Season 8 Episode 5. The episode is The Bells, that broadcast 13th of May 2019. Then we have Game of Thrones Season 5 Episode 9. The episode is The Dance of the Dragons, that broadcast 8th of June 2015. And finally, we have the clip of The Rings of Power Season 1 Episode 7. And the similarities are just glaring. I understand the makers were given the instruction to make a PG version of Game of Thrones, but that probably shouldn't have gone to the length of what appears to be clear plagiarism. The show's been getting a lot of flack for copy-pasting extras in their crowd scenes, and that's bad, but copy-pasting scenes from other shows is a lot worse. A building collapses on Isildur, and it's the prequel problem again. We already know he's not going to die. He's Isildur. He's got to cut the ring off of Sauron's finger. He can't be killed by a roof. And here we have the biggest villain of the episode, and the series as a whole really. Inconsistency in characters and in tone. The roof collapses on Isildur, and you're supposed to believe he's dead. And then it cuts to the Harfoots singing.
Went sleighing one autumn day so fine.
None of which was in any way welcome for me, and it's also complete tonal whiplash. You're supposed to care about Isildur supposedly being killed, even though I don't, and even though he clearly hasn't. This is supposed to be a moment of sorrow. And then the director instead cuts to the Harfoots singing a twee and over-saccharine piece of irritating faux folk music. And it's supposed to be happy now all of a sudden, but in reality it just rarely annoys me. The tonal shift reminds me of this clip from BBC Radio 4 of a very posh presenter corpsing live on air.
American historians have discovered what they think is the earliest recording of the human voice, made on a device which scratched sound waves onto paper blackened by smoke. It was made in 1860, 17 years before Thomas Edison first demonstrated the gramophone, and featured an excerpt from a French song, Au clair de la lune. The award-winning screenwriter Abbie Mann has died at the age of 80. He won an Academy Award in 1961 for Judgment at Nuremberg. Abbie Mann also won several Emmys, including one in 1973 for a film which featured a police detective called the character on whom a long-running TV series was eventually based.
It's 10 minutes past 8. Fighting between Shia militias and Iraqi government forces is into its third day.
The tension never gets to properly build because of the insane narrative shifts. You didn't have in Aliens with Bill Paxton as Hudson fighting the aliens and about to be taken, and then have James Cameron say, "OK, now cut to the clip of Benny Hill and fire up yakety sax."
Look who it is, everyone. It's only me.
Back to episode 7, and beware spoilers. Galadriel wakes up covered in ash, avoids the bad CGI horse on fire, and calls out for Halbrand and Elendil. Keep that in mind, it's important later. So Galadriel finds Theo as he calls out "Mother" in a thick faux northern accent. Mother! And it reminds me of the actor Pete Postlethwaite in the Sean Bean series Sharp. If you've never seen it, it's quite good. It's about a group of soldiers fighting in the Napoleonic Wars. If you want something to watch that's actually good, maybe give it a try. So Galadriel finds Theo, and she just seems to wander off after that. There are people around her crying out in pain. There's a dude 20 feet to her right, screaming and on fire. She's surrounded by the dead and wounded, but she doesn't stay and help. What the hell is going on with Galadriel? We later find out that her and Theo got separated from everyone else. So from what's in the show, it strongly appears that she just walked off. That's right. There are loads of people crying out in pain and coughing around her, and for unspecified reasons, she just sods off and goes for a walk. That's right. As far as I can tell, she just wanders off camera and disappears. Because in this show, as soon as something's off camera, it doesn't exist any longer. For some reason, her and Theo just left the village and left the wounded and injured behind, including Theo's mother. And this is a theme with Galadriel at this point. Remember one of her men that she almost left to die in a blizzard in episode 1. Maybe if she'd stayed behind, she could have helped Isildur. Maybe a roof wouldn't have fallen on his head. He was maybe 30 metres away from her at the time. Now this habit she has of leaving people behind to die, I'm just going to ask for certainty, are we 100% sure that Galadriel isn't a Harfoot? So how could they have done this better? Amazon could have had the fire and smoke so intense that Galadriel was forced to leave and physically couldn't help the people. Instead of just finding Theo, she could have found him injured, maybe with his leg trapped. This would have given her an opportunity to show heroism. She could have saved him and then been shot at by an orc archer, forcing her to leave to protect him and leaving her unable to help anyone else. Any of this would have been better than her just pissing off and leaving behind the dead and wounded. We cut back to Theo and Galadriel later, and they're hiding from orcs. Now she doesn't want to kill orcs any longer, saying her and Theo have neither position nor reinforcement to take them on. She wants to go to the Southlands alone, just a matter of a few episodes ago, to find orcs. Now here they are, and she doesn't want to fight them any longer. She's been looking for them for centuries. Now she's just not bothered. Showrunners, Have you forgotten what your character's core motivations are? Do you need me to remind you? Because they seem to change from scene to scene. How could they have done this better? Amazon could have had Galadriel injured during the explosion, forcing her to hide from the orcs. Or Theo could have been injured, forcing her to avoid a fight in order to protect him. Either of these would have been better than having Galadriel change her personality between episodes. We cut back to the Númenóreans, and the Queen has caught up with the main group. Elendil didn't stay and look for his son for some reason, but he asks the Queen about his son. He maybe gets told that his son is dead. Presumably, if this does happen, he gets told it off camera. I guess that's just not important enough, huh? The scene where the father finds out that his son is dead. What precisely it is that he gets told, why he doesn't go back to look. It's all off camera. One of the few interesting scenes in the entire show, and you do it off camera. Are you doing this on purpose, Amazon? Are you trying to make this show deliberately bad as a tax write-off or as a scam? Is this your version of A Springtime for Hitler? It's no secret that I don't think this show is going well, but it's not your fault, guy playing Elendil. Some of you actors are genuinely doing your best. We go back to Galadriel for another prolonged scene of walking and talking. Galadriel is now against killing orcs, apparently. She says killing orcs is not good. It darkens the heart, she says, to call dark deeds good. It gives a place for evil to thrive inside us, that every soldier must be mindful. So killing orcs is bad. Torturing and genocide are still A-OK for Galadriel, though, I guess. When that volcano happened, did she get hit in the head with a large piece of rock? She seems to have a completely different personality than only an episode ago. Because make no mistake, during this episode, characters will routinely forget their core motivations, like they're suffering from amnesia. We also learn that Galadriel's husband Celeborn is apparently dead, and God only knows how they're going to try and make that work. He's alive in the Peter Jackson films that come chronologically after this. What was the issue with her being happily married anyway, Amazon? What's the problem? Why are you being weird? What's so wrong with Galadriel being married that you had to write her husband out of the story? Maybe you can explain it to me, Amazon, because I genuinely have no idea. Theo blames himself for what happened because he gave the orcs the Keyblade. Galadriel seems to blame herself for what happened because she led the Númenóreans there, and I have no idea what this character's motivation is supposed to be at this point. Because if Galadriel cared and blamed herself for what happened to the Númenóreans that got killed by the volcano, why the hell did she leave the village and not help them? But in reality, all of this is Arondir's fault for not taking the Keyblade and running in the first place. Because of his dumb plan, everybody should have died, and it was just dumb luck that they didn't. It was only the arrival of the Númenóreans that saved them, and they didn't even know that help was coming. So I looked it up, and in plot terms, we're getting towards the War of the Last Alliance. Between then and the final defeat of Sauron is about 3,000 years. That's right, the entire continent is going to be in terror and darkness for 3,000 years because Arondir was a dumbass who wanted to get laid. It gets worse when you realise that Arondir has been stationed there for 79 years, and that means he was there before Bronwyn was even born. He watched her grow up from a little girl. You didn't think this through, did you, Amazon? This is sounding less like a romance and more like Arondir is a creepy groomer. Later on, Galadriel and Theo get back to the Númenórean camp. She walks in like she owns the place and doesn't even ask about Halbrand and if he's alive. She doesn't ask about Elendil either, and both of these men were friends who saved her life on 2 different occasions. She doesn't ask about Isildur either, who she talked to on the boat and knows full well is Elendil's son. Later on, she meets with the Queen and sees Elendil looking heartbroken and angry and like he wants to burst into tears, and she doesn't even bother to ask him what's wrong. She doesn't ask him about his son Isildur either. Meanwhile, Isildur's horse is going crazy and they have to release it. It runs off. Now, we know Isildur's alive because he can't die. He's needed in the story later. He can't be killed by a roof. I have a sneaking suspicion that Isildur's horse is going to find him. And it sucks to be Isildur, I guess. His friends and his dad left him for dead, but at least his horse cares about him. Captain Elendil watches the horse go and says, I should have left the elf in the sea. And finally he catches on. Galadriel is an arsehole. Later on, Galadriel talks to Bronwyn and says she needs to report what's happened to the Elven King. Bronwyn then says, but what about our king? Has nobody told you? So that part at the start, where Galadriel shouted for Halbrand and Elendil, that seems to have been the sum total extent of how much she searched for her friends before she gave them up for dead. She's then told, off camera again, that Halbrand is alive. And yes, someone had to tell Galadriel because she couldn't be asked to ask. It turns out that Halbrand is badly wounded, so Galadriel takes him to be healed by the elves and give a report to Gil-galad the Elven King. She also leaves her sword behind for no reason whatsoever, and Arondir stays with Bronwyn to make house and doesn't go with her, which makes no sense on any level, as it's clearly very important for this message to get through. So what are Halbrand and Galadriel going to use if they get attacked on the way? Harsh language? Halbrand is wounded and Galadriel has nothing but a dagger. And they all have, what was it? Oh yeah, neither position nor reinforcement, so they'll just be screwed, I guess. A sword would clearly be helpful in case of trouble, as would a seasoned elven warrior. But no, instead Arondir is staying with Bronwyn for reasons. So Galadriel is going to ride and take Halbrand from what is now Mordor to the elves before he dies from infection. The problem with this is that Lindon is on the other side of the continent. Now, handily for me, Amazon provided a map of the world that they're writing in, including a scale in the top right here. Oh boy, was that a mistake. Because from that, I can show how far on their map is 200 leagues. So I can make a yardstick of 200 leagues with that. And it's about 2 of them to Eriador and 3 to Lindon. So it's about 400 leagues to Eriador and 600 leagues to Lindon. And that's as the crow flies. 200 leagues is just above 1100 kilometres. So that's 2200 kilometres to Eriador and 3300 kilometres to Lindon. So I looked it up, and an average horse can apparently go 80 kilometres in one day. Allegedly, most horses will need several days of rest after a few days of consecutive riding. So I'm going to be kind, and let's say the horses don't need to rest, which in reality they would. So that's 1100 kilometres divided by 80 kilometres per day. So to go 200 leagues would take around 14 days. So if they're going to ride to Eriador, it's going to take them about a month. And Lindon will be a month and a half. Longer if they need to rest the horses. If the horses need 2 days rest for every 2 days of riding, getting Halbrand to Lindon will take in the region of 3 months. So I hope that festering wound isn't that bad. But let's face it, what am I thinking? They're just going to teleport again, aren't they? Is this supposed to be a comedy show? Because it's a lot funnier than She-Hulk Attorney at Law. So maybe that's why Arondir is staying. Maybe he doesn't want to leave Bronwyn for the next 6 months to go on a trip to Lindon. And he isn't in a mood to be heroic, I guess. He just has better things to do, I suppose. I'm not sure I've seen anything else get the concept of heroism quite as wrong as this show does. Screw duty, I suppose. Why bother being an elven soldier and trying to stop the ultimate evil when you can get laid with a hot MILF instead?
Look who it is, everyone. It's only me.
Later on in this episode, I'm going to be quite complimentary about the scenes with the dwarves. But first, I wanted this part to be seen by everybody. It's about the actress Sophia Non-Vete, who plays Disa in The Rings of Power. Because this made me laugh so much when I found it. Disa's been doing quite a good job. It's bold to ask her to do a Scottish accent because she's from England originally. And it's not an easy group of accents to do. But she has been good. Amazingly good, considering that according to IMDb, this is her 3rd ever acting role. Amazon Studios made the most expensive series in TV history and gave a role to someone who's only acted in 2 other things. And her second role was a children's TV game show called Swashbuckle on the CBeebies network from 2019, where she played the character of Captain Hey-Ho.
Right, I am so hungry for my seafood a la slurp. Is it ready yet, Cook?
I'm just about to start making it.
So stick around, if you will, for me getting angry at the Harfoots and the obligatory rant about Nazis, and later, as a treat, I promise I'll show you more of Sophia Non-Vete as Captain Hey-Ho, and no cheating and skipping forward. I'll know if you cheat and I'll be very disappointed in you. So before I start, I felt the need to go back to episode 6 again briefly, but don't worry, it's not about Nazis again, this time. It was about this chase scene. The one in episode 6 where Galadriel and Halbrand chase Adar and then Halbrand teleports in front of him. Just before that, Galadriel's chasing Adar, and look closely at their faces and I think you should see it. Because I'm pretty sure those are stunt people and not the real actors. In fact, they don't even really look much like the real actors. Why did you do a close-up of their faces? I understand the use for stunt people. They can ride better than the real actors. I get it. Just don't do a close-up of their faces when they don't look like the real actors. You could have shot them from behind and nobody would have known any difference. Also, in part 1 of the review of this episode, I commented regarding what looks like plagiarism in the scene with the burning horse, and this prompted returning commenter Mike Stanmore to add the following, in which he compared Galadriel in The Rings of Power to scenes of Elizabeth in the Kate Blanchett film Elizabeth the Golden Age. He said Galadriel is copied and pasted from Elizabeth. Her infamous Tempest scene is a copy of Kate Blanchett's scene in Elizabeth. The I have a hurricane in me. And Galadriel's armour is almost an exact copy of Elizabeth's. They're trying desperately to link Morfydd Clark's character with a far better actress. So let's have a look at the scenes in question.
That of your people? Or are you a castaway, grasping for a handhold in a tempest?
There is a tempest in me.
I too can command the wind, sir! I have a hurricane in me that will strip Spain bare if you dare to try me!
And yes, it seems he may have a point. God, this show is shameless. I may have to go back and look for more scenes that they may have, what's a nice word, borrowed from other sources. What am I going to do when it finishes? I may have to fall back on Seagal films to find something terrible enough to review. Though I suppose, in their defence, polished steel armour can tend to look a bit samey. I also want to briefly revisit the training fight scene from a few episodes ago. Because now we know that the entire Númenórean force were mounted, why were they training like that in the first place? Why were they not training for mounted combat? This show is like a bottomless pit of problems. The more you think about it, the worse it gets. One last bit of housekeeping, I promise, and then we can get on to the Harfoots. I've been working tirelessly to try and improve my audio quality, though you may not have noticed. So let me know if this sounds a little better. Maybe tell me what the problem is for you. I've been mostly trying to reduce sibilance and audio pops. So we cut to the Harfoots. And they're singing about eating effing snails again for a change. And I don't mean to harp on about this, but for a group that, according to the writers, relies solely on stealth for their survival, they are remarkably unstealthy. I guess the writers just forgot, because the Harfoots sing and walk across open fields like they haven't got a care in the world. The Harfoots arrive in a grove, hoping it will be full of food, and instead they find it's been burned. A flaming rock, it appears, has come all the way from Mount Doom. And don't even think about it. I'm not doing it now, because from the maps they have shown, I have a feeling that that flaming rock must have been thrown about 1,000 kilometres. Lenny Henry wants Gandalf to fix the damage using magic. And it strikes me that these scenes are the first time they've allowed Lenny Henry to be charming in any way. And he is a charming guy, even if he's a bit of a tool. And making him this unlikable is a frankly Herculean feat. Gandalf tries using magic and the Harfoots, like the geniuses they are, all stand under the tree. A branch breaks off and they all blame Gandalf for it. A branch falls towards Nori's little sister, so the Harfoots send Gandalf away, pointing him in the direction where he can maybe get help, when it was really their fault for standing under the tree like dumbasses in the first place, while he was doing what they asked him to do. The Harfoots are arseholes. Later, Nori says that she should have stayed on the trail and not helped Gandalf. He saved her life a few episodes ago. The Harfoots are arseholes. We cut back again after a tense and quite good scene in the Dwarven Kingdom that I'll get to later. We get tonal whiplash again as we cut to the Harfoots, and Poppy Proudfellow is singing about effing snails again, and this after Prince Durin has been disinherited by his father. The Harfoots now like Gandalf again because the trees regrew and filled with fruit. They're selfish little sods. So this lot come looking for Gandalf again, and Nori decides to be very stupid and tries to put them off Gandalf's trail. Her dad threatens them with a torch, so they burn all the Harfoots' carts. Her dad does the hearts as big as our feet bit, and then some Harfoots go looking for Gandalf to warn him and just walk over an open field. So I guess the writers just forgot again about that part where the Harfoots only survive by stealth. They have a forest on their left they could have gone through and stayed hidden, but no, they just walk through the middle of an open field. So now let's get back to what I think is the best part of the show, the dwarves. Peter Mullen playing King Durin III is probably the best part of the show. He's been acting steadily since 1988. He was in Trainspotting. He's a very safe pair of hands. You give the dwarves Scottish accents. It was quite a good move to get an experienced actor from Scotland, because it isn't the easiest accent to do, and Scotland has loads of good actors, but instead, for Prince Durin IV, you cast an actor from Wales, and contrary to what some Americans may think, Wales and Scotland are very different. And I'm sorry to say that the Welsh lad doesn't always pull it off. That's what she said. Despite that, they have some very good scenes between them. And Disa, played by Sophia Nonvete, is from England, which is different again from both Wales and Scotland. But she does quite a good job. Amazingly good, considering this is her third ever acting role, and I repeat, her second role was a children's TV game show called Swashbuckle from 2019, where she played the character of Captain Hey-Ho.
When in doubt, throw everything in and hope for the best. Welcome, Captain. You're in for a treat. Gonna make you something tasty, something neat to eat.
A show in which children try to win back fake jewels from mean pirates who then have to walk a plank into some gunge at the end.
There's a flash and a splash of milk. Keep the jug still. Look, not a drop spilled. Oops. This doesn't look right.
So Elrond meets with the dwarves and offers them a trade of food and timber for the next 500 years for a supply of the mithril. But Durin's father does not want to mine mithril for the elves, and his son the prince disagrees. What follows are some very good scenes. Both the king and the prince have valid positions. The king says that fire is in the dwarves' nature, and fire embraces the truth. The truth that all things must one day be consumed and fade away into ash. He says we do not dig in earth that can't support it, delving into depths beyond the darkness, tempting shadow, rock and mine to bury us all beneath the mountain. The Dwarven King says everything has its time. He does not want to risk dwarven lives to help the elves cheat death. He doesn't want to risk all that they have by defying the will of the gods and risking disaster for the elven people. The prince cannot accept it, and he wants to save his friend, and he sees the elves as allies. The king says the fate of the elves was decided many ages ago by minds much wiser, much farther seeing than our own. Defy their will, he says, and this entire kingdom may fall, perhaps the entire Middle-earth. I'm sorry, my son, he says, but their time has come. And this is quite powerful stuff. Sadly, this doesn't make great sense, because earlier in the series, the king wanted to mine the mithril for the dwarves. So now the show presents a binary choice of mine the mithril and give it to the elves, or don't mine it. When the king just a few episodes ago wanted to mine the mithril and use it to help the dwarves. Showrunners, did you forget your own story again? But it doesn't matter. Even with these errors, this may be the show's high point so far. Disa wants the prince to defy his father and mine the mithril anyway. And we have an interesting little set of characters here. I kind of wish we'd got to spend more time with the dwarves. Later, spurred on by Disa, Prince Durin defies his father and goes with Elrond to mine the mithril. They do another quite good scene of them bonding, and the actors sell the friendship quite well. But in all honesty, they maybe needed a few more scenes together. The whole thing still feels a little undercooked. As they break through into a cavern with a huge seam of mithril, they're caught by the king and his guards. And why do the elves need the dwarves to mine the mithril for them anyway? Can't they move and mine it themselves? Can't they just move next to the mithril? Anyway, that doesn't matter now. Elrond is thrown out of the Dwarven Kingdom, and this leads to a large argument between the king and the prince. The king is angry at being disobeyed. The prince is angry because he wants to help his friend and finds the king's actions stifling and restrictive. The prince tells his father that Elrond is as much of a brother to him as if he grew up in his mother's womb, and the king goes nuclear, shouting, "How dare you!" He disinherits his son. They both accuse the other of betraying their people. The father accuses the son of siding with the elves. The son says the father is betraying his people by betraying their allies. And it's good, powerful stuff. And then it's ruined by cutting to Poppy Proudfillow singing about effing snails again. And then it's ruined again later for a second time, as the king seals up the cavern with the mithril and throws the leaf inside that he got from the elves. The leaf floats slowly down, maybe 50 feet, and there's just a Balrog sitting down there that was just on the other side of that wall, and it feels way too abrupt and totally unearned. So that's it for episode 7. Some very good scenes, lost and drowning in a sea of complete nonsense. Only one more episode to go. Let's see if they can stick the landing, but I'm not holding my breath.
Could you make me a cup of tea, please, Stephanie?